Okay, so we've got a box here, and the box is set up with a lot of divisions in it. This is going to be my serial box. I've got, basically I've divided each side's size by 10 and added that into the segments section of my box. So I've got a really regular grid of divisions all the way across. I know this is going to deform really well. And I've just turned on that fillet function as well and put a little fillet on the edges, just to make it a little smoother and not quite so hard-edged, and it looks a little more organic this way. So now we want to set up some deformers. So I want this serial box to be able to bend backwards and forwards as if it's leaning backwards and forwards. So I'm going to create a bend deformer. I also want it to be able to twist from side to side so it can sort of look, because obviously it doesn't have a head or arms or anything like that. So I'm going to create a twist deformer. And because we want to try and use the principles of animation, and squash and stretch is a really significant, one of those principles, I'm going to create a squash and stretch deformer as well. So these three deformers, they're all going to be put on the box, and they're going to control how we can actually animate this thing and give it some life. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the bend deformer. I'm going to drag and drop it onto my serial box, my cube. And with this deformer, I can select it, and it's got a fit to parent option in its object tab. So I can fit it to the parent. And now if I grab my bend deformer and just tweak the strength, I can see that my bend deformer is working. And we can also change the angle of it as well. So it swings around, and we can bend it in whichever angle we want, which is fine. The other thing that I want to do with this bend deformer, if I just crank up the strength value here, one thing you kind of notice with this bend deformer is as you bend it, the box is actually stretching out. It's actually getting longer. Now, we're going to use our squash and stretch deformer to do that squashing and stretching. So what I want to do is I want to turn on this keep y-axis length function on my bend deformer, and that means that what we get now is just a straight bend. There's no stretching at all. So that bend deformer is all working. I'm happy with that. Okay, let's set up the twist deformer next. So I'm going to grab my twist deformer, drag it and drop it onto the cube. And again, with this one, I can fit it to the parent. So I'm going to do that and then check the angle of this. And what we can see now is this box is twisting backwards and forwards, also from side to side. And if you could imagine this box was alive, you could animate this to make it appear that the box was looking from side to side. So that's just changing this twist angle. So that's all good. I'm happy with that. So I've got a bend and a twist set up. Now I'm just going to set up my squash and stretch. This one's takes a little more work to set up, but let's drag and drop it onto the cube. And if I squash and stretch this by adjusting the factor, the squash and stretch factor, I'm only getting the bottom of it squashing and stretching. Now, the squash and stretch deformer has a fit to parent option, and if I do that and start adjusting the squash and stretch, I can see it squashing and stretching, but we had the same issue when we animated the bouncing ball. We actually want the squash and stretch to squash and stretch from the base of the object. We don't want it to stretch from the middle. So I'm going to undo a few steps. I'm not going to use that fit to parent. All I need to do is I need to change where my squash and stretch is happening. At the moment, when it's just the default settings, when I adjust the factor, it's squashing and stretching from the base, but it's not covering the entire object. So what I want to do is put a bit of a squash and stretch factor on so I can see the effect. Then what I want to do is I want to change the top limit of this deformer. So all I need to do here is just click and drag on that value. You'll notice the slider doesn't go above 100, but we can still set the value higher than 100 if we need to. So I'm going to click and drag this top setting. So this is saying what's the top most extreme of height that the deformer will squash and stretch. So mine is up around 500 somewhere. And now if I adjust that factor again, now we've got squash and stretch happening. It's happening from the base of the object, and the entire object is squashing and stretching. So that's great, that's what we want to do. So this is one situation where we don't want to use the fit to parent. We want that squash and stretch to be working from the bottom. We just need to change this top limit so that it's covering the entire object. So the squash and stretch factor, this is what we animate. When the factor is at 100%, there's no squash or stretch. When it's lower than 100, you squash. When it's above 100, you get stretch. There's a lot of other settings there. We're not going to worry about those too much. That factor is really about it, other than the top that we need to adjust. Okay, so those are all set up. So that's our deformers created for our serial box character. Now, the other thing that's really important is the order that these deformers work in. Cinema 4D, when you've got a bunch of deformers on an object, it calculates them from the top downwards. So it'll do the squash and stretch first, then it'll do a twist if we've got a twist, and then it will do the bend if we've got some kind of a bend built into it. And I can see straight away, looking at my object, if I want to kind of animate this and create some poses by using these deformers, something weird's happening here already because I've got this twist that happened before. I'll just turn that bend off. And the twist isn't calculating, or it's not deforming the entire way through the object. The reason for that is the twist, you can see the deformer here, this light sort of bluey purple colour. You can see the twist deformer. There's its shape there. Because we've stretched the box above the deformer, only the area inside there is twisted and the stuff outside it isn't. So in this case, for this particular character, we actually need the twist to happen first. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to drag and drop this twist deformer above the squash and stretch deformer. So now I can see the twist deformer has happened first. I'm just going to set this factor back to 100. So there's my twist. That's happening first. So that's all good. Then my squash and stretch is going to stretch it or squash it while it's still twisted. So that's all good. And then after that, I've got a bend deformer that's bending it backwards and forwards. So I think that looks okay. Twist it back the other way. And if we stretch this out a bit, ooh, that looks okay. Now one problem here is that when I bend with my bend deformer, we can see this bend effect, it's stopping at the limits of our deformer. It's not going beyond that. Now I think what we can do here is we can change our bend deformer from a limited deformer to an unlimited, which means that outside of this deformation box, it just continues doing whatever it was that we had set up. So now we get a more complete bend. So this is looking pretty good. I think we're on the right track here because we've got some bend, we've got squash and stretch working, and we've got twist that we're able to do as well. So this looks like a pretty good setup. So we've got our serial box made out of a cube, then we've got a twist, squash and stretch, and bend deformer in that order.